few years ago, survival games were all the rage. You couldn't go more than a few days without seeing one releasing on Steam. All of varying quality, from genuine good games to asset flips to cash grab early access releases that never got finished. Since the success of Doom 2016, that trend has changed to the old school shooter. Over the past year or so, we've seen an increase in such shooters, but it is 2019 that we're really starting to see a boom. Anyone who's watched my autopsies for any length of time will know I'm a sucker when it comes to old school shooters, and I'm willing to give pretty much anything that looks like one a go. And while I've been bitten by a few, just like with any other genre, there are those that are genuinely surprisingly decent despite not looking like much. And the game we're looking at today is an old school inspired shooter to add to the ever increasing ranks. Excive A-1000, we'll call it Excive from here on in, is an old school inspired FPS game developed and published by indie developer Droid Riot. It released on Steam April 18, 2019 and is priced at €4.99. Excive is a decent old school FPS that really evokes the feeling of playing a game from the 90s, thanks to its excellent retro visuals and solid gameplay. But its short campaign and the lack of options including modern screen resolutions, change of controls and other small details will frustrate some players. There isn't a plot to Excive as such, but more of an objective. You are the new robot prototype Excive A-1000, and your objective is to find the cyber intelligence and destroy it, killing anything that stands in your path. And that is exactly what you do. There is a total of 12 levels across 4 locations in Excive, split into 8 standard levels and 4 boss levels. These 4 locations or environments being a woodland area with ruins, a canyon, a snow environment, and a military base environment. Each of the levels have a specific objective that must be completed, including destroying enemy barracks, making your way through a minefield, and defeating an enemy prototype machine. When you look at the level design to Excive, you will immediately notice it is more like Wolfenstein 3D as opposed to Doom. But thankfully the levels are designed in a manner that isn't maze-like, and is actually very easy to navigate. There was never a point where I got lost and couldn't find my way around, or found myself going in circles, so they're very well designed in that regard. However, the levels are not without their frustrations. Firstly are the explosive mines that you come across in many of the levels, with some levels revolving around getting through minefields. The problem isn't the fact that these mines exist, but rather they're hard to see, and very often you will find yourself stepping on them before you even know they're there. This is especially the case in the canyon, where they're nothing more than a tiny glowing dot. A little bit of extra visibility, or even if there was a blipping sound or something like that, would really lessen that frustration. The second issue is the finding of secrets is not explained in the game. Out of habit from playing other such games, you would think of pressing the interact key to open a secret door, but in Excive you actually need to shoot the false walls that then reveal the secret locations. So for a while I didn't find any secrets because I was interacting with the walls instead of shooting them. I only found this out by pure accident, where a bullet missed an enemy and hit the wall behind them, revealing a secret. A tiny bit of signposting wouldn't go astray. The final issue with the level design is the third boss. In this specific level you need to actually escape from the boss as opposed to fighting it. So basically you need to make your way through yet another bloody minefield, all the while avoiding the boss from killing you at the same time. It's just a crappy level that isn't much fun, and more often than not you die due to not seeing a mine, which blows you up. Other than that, the levels are pretty good. They're a good size with plenty of secrets to find and enemies to kill. The game could have done with a few more levels, but for the price tag it is reasonable. I've played shorter games that have cost more, so it isn't too bad. As for the gameplay itself, it is everything you'd expect from an old school inspired shooter. You make your way through each of the levels, completing the objective given, finding secrets with goodies in them and killing anything that moves. In Excive's case, a roster of various other robots. There is a total of 6 different enemies in Excive and 4 bosses. You face off against small, more basic robots to giant ones with twin Gatling gun arms and giant plasma rifles. And then the bosses are these ginormous robots of destruction, to the point you could consider them godlike beings. Each of the enemies fit in perfectly with the theme of the game and certainly do the job they're intended to, but they have their issues. The enemy AI is extremely basic, to the point that it sometimes gets stuck in the environment props. Not only that, they only open fire on you from a specific distance, allowing you to keep outside of that activation range and then kill them easily before they even shoot at you. This also applies to the boss enemies too. They look badass and intimidating, but they only have a small attack range that is easily avoided. It doesn't make for very challenging gameplay, even in the hardest difficulty, but with that said, they are still fun to mow down in excessive numbers. There's a total of 7 weapons in Excive. The first is the starting out weapon of the pistol, a weak weapon but a good fallback in the early stages. Then you have a minigun that rapidly takes down large groups of weaker enemies in seconds. Next is the shotgun, which is great for medium-sized enemies, taking them out in 2 or 3 blasts. Then there is of course the classic rocket launcher that can kill pretty much any standard enemies in one hit. And what would a futuristic game be without a plasma rifle? A powerful rapid firing weapon that is only second to the rocket launcher. There are also 2 weapons that separate from that of the firearms. The first is the electric glove. This is your melee weapon for taking out enemies up close, but I never found the need to use it. The second are 2 cannons that are attached to your shoulder that lob explosive rounds towards enemies, and you only have 20 rounds in each per level. They're also extremely useful for getting rid of mines. It's a very useful weapon early in the game, but your main guns quickly make the shoulder cannons obsolete, with the exception of taking out the mines that are in your way. The weapons in Excive are pretty solid. They feel powerful to use and the sound effects that go with them are fantastic. But some are more useful than others. For example, the electric glove is useless. As the amount of ammo there is in the game, I never had a need to use it. The shotgun is also a little bit piddly, as the damage it does compared to its slow rate of fire makes it an underwhelming weapon compared to that of the rocket launcher, minigun and plasma rifle. And of course the shoulder cannons lose their usefulness, with the exception of being good for clearing out mines. But with that said, of the weapons that are useful and good, you never get tired of using them, and they're extremely satisfying to use from start to finish. What is unique to Excive is how you have a limited amount of stamina to run with. This is shown by the blue bar that is located under the green health bar. Essentially how this works is that it's supposed to be your energy, I'm guessing, and the more you run the lower that energy gets. If you run out you can't run anymore. Throughout the levels however you can find energy pickups along with them being dropped by every enemy you kill. It is a nice little touch that stops you from running around the place like a robotic roadrunner and adds a level of strategy and tactics, especially when facing the bosses. It isn't a game changer, but it certainly does the job it is intended to. There are 4 difficulty settings in Excive, called Wimp, Player, Hardcore and Insane. These are essentially easy, medium, hard and very hard. The difficulty settings don't increase the number of enemies in the maps like in other games, but instead increase the health points and damage of the enemies. This increase in damage and health of enemies doesn't affect the gameplay in any major way, especially with the AI as weak and basic as it is, but nevertheless it does increase the challenge a very small bit for those looking for the extra challenge. As for the gameplay itself, it is pretty good. It's fast paced, adrenaline filled action that keeps going from the moment you start it to when you finish, but it has its share of problems too. There is no HUD hit detection, meaning when you're being hit by an enemy you have no way of knowing where you're being shot from unless they're in front of you, and occasionally there are hidden enemy placements where you can't see them unless you're looking in the direction from a very specific angle, which can cause some frustrating deaths, especially in the higher difficulty settings. The biggest frustration with Excive however is the lack of options. There is no way of changing the controls, and with them being WASD, they're unsuitable for left-handed players, who usually use a setup of arrow keys for movement. I am left-handed, but thankfully I play games as if I was right-handed, otherwise I'd have a very hard time playing this. The resolution will also be another major issue for some players. The game runs at I reckon about 800 by 600 as opposed to my usual of 1920 by 1080. It didn't really bother me while playing, but it has certainly been a nightmare when it comes to making this video. I guess the idea of it is to give a true 90s experience by having the resolution like this. Either that or the player was just lazy about it. But it is a very risky thing to do in 2019 and will undoubtedly piss off a lot of gamers. Another issue is that when you die, you start a level with only the pistol, meaning that even though you save your game at the end of each level, you simply restarting the level won't reload your save file with weapons. Therefore you need to exit the main menu and load your save game from there. It may be a minor annoyance, but something that definitely shouldn't be there in a game released in 2019. The final main issue is the field of view is absolute dirt. You can't see very far in front of you at all, making it hard to see what enemies lying in wait on the horizon. I think this may have been intentional, due to the enemies having such a short range activation for attacking, an artificial way of adding a bit of challenge to the game. It doesn't hinder you too much, but it does mean it's easy to miss enemies and have them piling on you quickly if you aren't careful. And while we're talking about negatives, I might as well add in that there are no achievements or Steam trading card drops for Excive, so if you're into either of them, they aren't present here. Excive's gameplay is a fun experience that pays its homage to the 90s FPS, especially the likes of Wolfenstein, Blackstone and Rise of the Triad. It's action packed, it's adrenaline filled and it's fast paced, and that is exactly what I look for in such a game. It has all the critical elements that make this style of gameplay a joy to play despite its issues. However, I can't say it is a game that's gameplay has been well designed. There are too many issues and too much of a lack of polish. The atmosphere to Excive is a lot like everything else. it's alright. The developer has done a great job of getting that robotic and sci-fi feel across between the sounds of the robots when they are hit and die along with when they detect you. The soundtrack really adds to the 90s FPS feel that the gameplay and visuals already give, really showing its Doom inspiration with a lot of the tracks. This is especially the case with the first level music track that has a fast paced, hard hitting drums and guitar that wouldn't feel out of place in E1M1 of Doom. Admittingly, the environments don't do much for the atmosphere, they don't really fit in all that well with the futuristic theme with the exception of the final environment, but the music and the sound effects do an alright job of establishing the theme and wouldn't feel amiss in a cheesy low budget 90s robot action film, and I think in many ways it's such films that the inspiration for Excive was built from. I knew from the moment I saw Excive's store page that it was going to be a gamble as to whether it would be any good or not. In some ways it was a pleasant surprise, but it certainly isn't without its need for polish and extra work. Its problems mostly revolve around enemy AI, small technical details and the lack of options along with the inability to change the controls, all of which is an understandably tedious process for indie developers to implement, but a very crucial one nevertheless, and they really aren't something that can be skipped in this day and age of high quality expectations, even in the indie scene. Regardless of its problems, I overall enjoyed my time with Excive. The mowing down of tons of robots with a mostly satisfying arsenal of weapons never got old. It ain't perfect, and certainly is no Dusk of Medieval or even Project Warlock, but I can't call Excive a disaster either. Its level of polish isn't up to the standards where I could call it a good game though, and it is in dire need of some refinement. And with that, I give Excive a 4 out of 10. Excive is one of those games that is pretty poor, but regardless it is one that has a charm to it, and is still fun to play even if I cannot recommend it as a whole. It just goes to show, even those games that are not particularly good doesn't mean they can't sometimes still be fun to play.